Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And in our previous episode, we looked at the rise and fall of Brunswick Town, which was one of colonial North Carolina's most important ports. In this episode, we're going to move forward nearly a century later to examine how the ruins of Brunswick Town became the foundation for one of the Confederacy's most important defensive positions, which was Fort Anderson, which was built on top of the remains of Brunswick Town. So, Chris, it's interesting that you have this same site that between two major wars, the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, it shows up twice, yet most people don't know anything about it.
Yeah, and it's an extremely important piece of history, not just in one moment, as you say, but in several moments. And it serves a great purpose, especially during the Civil War, because you talked about in the last episode Brunswick being established and being built, and yet it serves as a gateway, if you will, to Wilmington, and Wilmington being a huge port city in the state of North Carolina, and especially during that time, is using the Cape Fear River just to kind of be able to to transport produce and equipment and things of that nature. It was extremely important. And so now, when you have the efforts going on with the Confederacy trying to break away from the Union and the war breaks out, the Confederacy knew that if they did not protect those shipping channels, that was going to be a surefire way to kind of lose the war and basically lose all that they felt that they deserved. And so the creation of Fort Anderson was pivotal in protecting the Cape Fear River as well as Wilmington and allowing for the transportation of various goods and all throughout the southern states. So very, very important. And, Ray, as you continue to look at this, we talked a little bit about how Brunswick in the way it was named and kind of how all that plays out. Well, Fort Anderson does actually get named because of an actual colonel in the Confederacy. So it's not just Fort, just make up a name, but there is some history behind the naming of this fort.
Yeah, and one thing I do want our listeners to understand is we are talking about the Confederacy during the Civil War. North Carolina did secede from the Union in the Civil War, and it became part of the Confederacy. And the Cape Fear River is so very important during this time because the mouth of the Cape Fear River, which is open straight up onto the Atlantic Ocean, that pathway, which goes up into North Carolina, is very important. You talked about this, getting food, getting supplies, getting men and even in non-military times, transportation and other things, that river proved to be very, very important during this time. So the Confederates understand if they're going to hold North Carolina, they're going to have to hold the Cape Fear River. And the Union understood that one of the ways to prevent the Confederacy from doing well in North Carolina was to take that very important artery away from the Confederacy. And when we talk about Fort Anderson itself, Chris, I just find it to be very fascinating because I've actually been there several times and walked around. And we talked last time that you had of course Brunswick Town there, and if you go there today, you got all the remains of the different houses and buildings that were there. It's all foundational stuff. There's nothing standing up. The only thing that is standing up is the old St. Philip's Church there. Um, but as a fort, when the Confederacy was going in to put up this fort, they didn't build a fort. They built land structures. They built earthen fortifications. They didn't build metal or anything like that because what they found was those earthen fortifications would withstand more firepower than the man-made fortifications would. So it was very important for them to create that type of fort at Fort Anderson, and they did the same thing up the river toward the Atlantic Ocean at Fort Fisher. If you go there, even today, most of it is earthen fortification and not man-made fortification, so to speak.
Well, and you think about this earthen fortifications. I mean, we look at engineering and we marvel at how we're able to build these skyscrapers and these other very extensive buildings that can withstand hurricanes and tornadoes and just about anything and everything. But we're talking in the 1860s, finding a way that creates structures without using other materials except the earth. And I think that just goes to show the power of the earth and the beauty of the earth. They were talking about how, and you mentioned it, with these earthen structures, that underneath the earthen structures, they were able to create bomb shelters, which actually protected them from the bombardment that was soon to come and would literally rain down on them. That it didn't require any other resource. You didn't have to have any other materials except the earth. And I know if you're building a sandcastle or if you're building a structure out of dirt, and you pat it down, pat it down, pat it down, put a little bit of water on it and continue to pat, it becomes extremely hard and solid. And so I just imagine the amount of earth that had to be moved to have this done. But the other thing that just impresses me is that you didn't have a bobcat, you didn't have a bulldozer, you didn't have any other type of equipment. That a lot of this was done by hand and it was done by mule, and that's how you did it. And it just goes to show the complexity of the structure, the ability to build the structure with very limited means, but also the marvel of the genius of saying, this is going to be a fort that we're just going to use the material that's already here. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and you talk about the manpower that was required when we think about Fort Fisher, which is right, I guess, down river from Fort Anderson. They not only used soldiers, they also used Native Americans today among the Lumbee. They have people who have descendants who worked there at Fort Fisher building those structures. Of course, also, again, we're talking about the Confederacy during the Civil War. You have slave labor being used to build these structures. But yeah, Chris, I mean, it's very impressive. And I know you've been to Fort Fisher and Fort Anderson as well. When you go inside and you're surrounded by this earthen fort, these things are big. I mean, this is not small. And these people are building these things, like you said, Chris, by hand, literally by shovel. I mean, that's impressive. In some ways, I think more impressive than if they had built, steel and armored um, fortifications in some ways.
Yeah, do you remember any research into how long it took to actually build Fort Anderson? I don't remember the exact time because I'm just curious with the lack of machinery, how long
It
it
was
was.
it was finished in 1862, or it was constructed there in 1862. So I'm saying about a year, maybe a little less. It didn't take them long, which is, it's just absolutely fascinating. I mean, we couldn't build something like that in that period of time today, I don't think.
There's no way that that would be able to be done. And I think that just goes to show the determination. Now, also, they knew it was life or death. I mean, and sometimes when you know something is life or death, you're going to work very different to be able to fix whatever it is that's going on. So I feel that that's pretty important as well. So just a lot to be amazed and just the marvel of it.
Yeah, and one thing I did have in my notes here, I was listening to a discussion about Fort Anderson, and one of the guys pointed out, more of a military historian who studies Fort Anderson and this kind of thing, says 95% of the fort is still standing. I mean, you think about that when you think about even Fort Fisher. If you go down to Fort Fisher today, they've reconstructed large parts of it. But, after the Civil War time and the ocean took its toll, and then during World War II, they knocked down large parts of the earthen works to uh, create a landing strip there. So there's large chunks that had to be rebuilt for our purposes today of having a museum or a place people could visit. But when you talk about Fort Anderson, approximately 95% of that fort, 95% of that earthenwork is still there. And that just shows that it wasn't, sort of quick jip, just throw something together. It was something that they put a lot of work into, a lot of effort into. And Chris, during the battle, when it comes, um, it's going to prove its weight in gold, or in this case, its weight in soil, I guess you could say.
I like that. Yeah, the weight in the soil. And let's also think through that the amount of guns that they put on
Yeah.
these forts. I was reading just some of the things. It was this Whitworth gun, but they were 32-pound guns and they were known for their long range accuracy and other things. And so this really just demonstrates how they thought through to place it up high so that from the higher ground you had access in case the boats were to come and to try to send men in there. You had angles of attack. You could go out towards the river. You could go down. You had so many ways that you could move. And just kind of reading some of the amount of weaponry that was there, it's fascinating also. And that they had, like two batteries, one running down one side and the other going down the other side, and being able to it's truly a place of protection. You felt that you could survive.
Yeah, and it's going to come 1865, January 1865. Fort Fisher's going to fall. The Confederates are going to, I mean, the Union is going to take Fort Fisher from the Confederates. Fort Fisher is going to fall. And that means next up on the list is the all-important port of Wilmington. So the Confederacy now has to find a way to protect Wilmington. Now, again, Fort Anderson, it's been around several years by this particular point, but now its time has come. So, in order to protect it, it is armed with approximately 1,100 Confederate troops, members of the North Carolina Junior Reserves, who teenage soldiers called into service during the war, and others were manned there, ready to take the weaponry that you had talked about to protect not just simply Fort Anderson, but to protect that Fort Wilmington right up the way.
Yeah, and I remember I was reading something that was from an artilleryman who was actually part of that group that had the opportunity to take care of that area, and they felt confident. His words were is that we feel confident that we will be able to keep all people from reaching Wilmington by this route. And he goes on to say that we've up to this time done our full duty in building fortifications for the defense of Wilmington, as well as for the protection of our homes and firesides, wives, children, and most of all, near and dear to us. If the enemy should ever approach us here, we intend to give him a warm reception. So, in other words, if you're going to do it, you know, come, but you better be
I like
prepared.
that, a warm reception. There's two ways one could take that. I
Right.
think, not so friendly or warm in the sense of cannon fire and
Correct.
very, very warm. A dry,
Very warm. You want to stay away from it.
yeah. So it comes to pass February 17, February 19, 1865, Union boats move into the area, and they start, and the people there at Fort Anderson start unloading, a heavy bombardment on Union troops, Union ships. General Jacob Cox leads Union troops, which you sort of outflank the Confederate position there. Um, and Fort Anderson quickly shows how capable it is, because the Union I'm talking about how the Confederate forces there at Fort Anderson launched barrages of cannon fire at the Union forces, but the Union forces were also launching cannon fire and soldiers going into, or attempting to get into the fort itself.
Yeah, and I go back and I just think about, this concept of fight for your country. And for the Confederacy during this time, it was fighting for the Confederacy, as this artilleryman mentioned, to protect our family, to protect our friends, but also Wilmington. It just goes to show the power of trade. And, people who are not necessarily from southeastern North Carolina do not fully appreciate the power of Wilmington as a port. And even today, being able to see the many large ships that come in and out, because it does carry transportation out into the world through the Atlantic Ocean, but all the way across the United States using the various rivers and waterways that are available. So it was an important piece of the South during that time. And it still plays a major role even in today's society.
Yeah, Wilmington is very important for North Carolina, for southeastern North Carolina today. So at any rate, Union troops, like I said, under Major General Jacob Cox, are closing in on the fort. And the people there in the fort, the soldiers there in the fort, under the command of Brigadier General Johnson Haygood, decide we don't want to be encircled, we don't want to be captured, we don't want any of that. So in the dark of night, Chris, they evacuate Fort Anderson, and they just sort of move out of Fort Anderson, leaving the fort there to itself, basically. So they do fight, they do put up a fight. Of course, the main fight they've got there is to protect Wilmington and to try to prevent the Union forces from moving up the Cape Fear River. But when it becomes clear that the fort was likely to fall or was going to fall, Brigadier General Johnson Haygood said, okay, it's time for us to get out of there. And I went a number of years ago, Chris, to a reenactment of this battle. They had it there at Fort Anderson, and it was quite amazing because they were using like fires, like bonfires, to create the illusion sort of having, things detonating within the fort. They were using some fireworks and other things to create the illusion of having gunfire or cannon fire coming in. They shot some of the cannon they had there, which, if you've ever heard cannon fire up close, this is very loud. But two things I remember, Chris, from that particular event. Number one was how dark it was. It was a clear night, moon, stars, everything, but with all the smoke, how dark it got out there, how hard it was to see, but also the smell of the smoke. And I was just trying to put myself in the place of those soldiers that night who were trying to get out of that fort before the Union forces came in, in the darkness, in the smoke, the loud cannon fire, the gunfire, and also the knowledge that, you got to get out of there before it's too late.
Yeah, just thinking, I've always heard that if you're in the ocean in the middle of the night, no matter how many stars are out, it is one of the darkest places you'll find yourself. And so I can imagine being there, not having any artificial light, but you are also wondering who's coming, when are they coming? And it's that fear that can paralyze you also because you cannot see. And yet, you have to do your very best to protect, but also you're concerned about your own safety. So I can't even imagine, what it must have been like just being at that fort, knowing that you are trying to protect yourself from an invisible enemy.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we often, I think, we read about these battles, in the American Revolution, the Civil War, War of 1812, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, etc. We read about this stuff and we study what happened. But I'll tell you, there's something very different. Even though you're not there, we're not in the mid 19th century standing there as a Confederate soldier or a Union soldier or what have you. But even standing there as an observer of a reenactment on a cold February night at Fort Anderson, just having that experience sort of puts you there. It puts you in the moment, so to speak, just a little bit. Use a little imagination, squint your eyes a little bit, and you felt like you were there. It was very loud and very disorienting. So, um,
And, one final thing to go along with that is the beauty of
yeah.
being able to go and revisit these places. That it is something that you're able to go and still see. You've recalled, seeing reenactments and just having that opportunity to try to put yourself in a place where they were. And so I encourage our listeners to, it doesn't have to be Fort Anderson or Brunswick, but wherever you live, take advantage of these places that are still here and just go and visit and place yourself in that area so that you can try to get a slight understanding of just how impressive it was for the structure, but also of what took place there.
Okay, so I can't let this episode go, Chris, without directing people to our friends there at Fort Anderson. It's preserved both Brunswick Town and Fort Anderson at the State Historic Site, which is located at 8884 St. Philip's Road, southeast in Winnebago, North Carolina, which is in Brunswick County. It's not hard to find. It is open to the public and it is free of charge. You can walk around the surviving earthwork mounds of the Confederate fort. You can explore archaeological remains of Brunswick Town, visit Phillips Church there as well, look at the remaining graves of the people who were buried there. We also want to direct people who are interested. You mentioned preserving these locations, supporting locations like Brunswick Town and Fort Fisher is very the battleship North Carolina and others a very important part of that. But you can also support the folks at the American Battlefield Trust. You can go to their website at www.battlefields.org and support their cause as they work to preserve these very important historical locations, not just simply for us, but for future generations as well. So, with that all said, we hope you enjoyed this episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. Please share this episode with your family and friends. Give us a like on Facebook, follow us on Facebook, give us a like on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Until next time, I'm Ray,
I'm Chris.
and we'll talk to you later.